like most of us is probably multifactorial. One of it is my mentors. I trained at University of Southern California, and we had a very strong shoulder group. All surgeons are problem solvers, and I think as orthopedic surgeons, we're very dependent on our tools, biology, and I have to sometimes Google on my other screen as the meeting's going on because I try to keep up with these people that do it all the time. So differentiating applicants, you have 10 papers, you have 5 papers, so you must be better, even though maybe your hands are not as good as it, so sometimes it's just another way to grade applicants, which I think maybe is not the best intent.
Hi guys, we are in another video of Brew with Bones, perhaps a new podcast series, this time Entrepreneurship and Orthopaedics. And the guest of honor today is Dr. Anshu Singh, who is a Harvard educated shoulder surgeon based in San Diego, United States. Besides being a shoulder surgeon, he is the founder of G Lab X and also an angel investor in a couple of healthcare startups. So he is a man who's balancing medicine and entrepreneurship at the same time. I'm the host here, Dr. Giri, and we have another designer surgeon with us, Dr. Sindhil Velan, who's going to interview Dr. Anshuman Singh with us.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody, and hello, Anshu. Welcome to Chennai, and also welcome to India as such. So, I think to start with, we want to ask you what really brought you to shoulder elbow surgery as such. Before we actually ask you about your entrepreneurship journey. So, what kind of inspired you, or who inspired you? Maybe tell us your story.
Well, I think like most of us is probably multifactorial. One of it is my mentors. I trained at University of Southern California, and we had a very strong shoulder group there. There was a surgeon, Dr. Itamura, who was very hardworking. He did difficult cases. He would beat you up all day, but then he would take care of you afterwards. He was like your big brother. And I think a lot of us from that generation and that training program went into shoulder. That's one aspect. And the other one was when I was a resident, the reverse shoulder just got FDA approved in the United States. And so it was very new and exciting. And I knew that the field would change a lot in my time. And I, instead of doing hip and knee, which was probably going to be about the same, I knew that from the time I started to the time I finished, it would be very different. And I thought that was exciting. So I think those two things. And I think the last aspect is I really love trauma. And I really like the idea that I can incorporate trauma, young patients, old patients, scope, reconstruction into one practice. I don't just have to have pediatric patients or just have degenerative issues. So I think the breadth of it, the dynamism of shoulder and elbow surgery, and then of course just having mentors that you like and you see yourself wanting to be like these people, I think those things really are the three main things.
I think it's always like, the cardiothoracic surgeons are called the king of surgeons. The shoulder surgeons are called the sexy surgeons, So I think probably, it kind of, the
I've never heard that, but I'll take it as a compliment.
more flamboyance, I think probably, takes you, because a job chooses you rather than actually you choose a job. I mean, you kind of get into it. But I think apart from, being a shoulder surgeon, you are an entrepreneur yourself. You built a lab, you have your company. So what inspires you to actually take up entrepreneurship as a role as such? Why not just stay as a surgeon? I mean, what kind of takes you into this role as well? How do you balance it?
I think all surgeons are problem solvers, and I think as orthopedic surgeons, we're very dependent on our tools. And for maybe a vast majority of things, the tools are adequate. But I think if you do enough surgery and do hundreds and thousands of surgeries, I think it's natural that you think, oh, if I just did this, it would be better. And maybe you just, make a comment and move on. But I feel like there was enough of an interest on my part that I started moving into actual design work and patenting things. My brother's a lawyer too, so it helped me a little bit from the patenting aspect of things. So I think it was, the intellectual curiosity and the idea that you could maybe do things better and help yourself and help your patients. So I think that sort of was worth it for me.
I've seen many designer surgeons based in the US. They come up with an idea, talk to the company people, and then the company takes over the design part. They work with the company engineers. But you have been quite different. You decided to start your own lab where you had an engineering team to work with. So what motivated you to start a separate lab
No, I think that's
and
interesting. I
go
think
on?
there's a couple of reasons. One is my hospital is very restrictive on industry relationships, and so it was very difficult to just go through the traditional route. But I still was interested enough to do something, and so I actually talked to the lawyers at my institution a lot in my first couple of years, and they commented. They said, "I've never talked to a junior doctor this much," you know. So and so the main avenue I had was to create my own intellectual property, and with that they were okay, but they were not okay with me developing it with the vendor. And so that was the initial impetus for that. You know, there are some pluses and minuses to doing it yourself. I think obviously the burden is much more on you. The stress level is probably a little bit higher. The cycle is longer, but you also have a little more control. And I think probably more of your own ideas will be, you know, manifested in the end. And so I think there's some pluses and minuses to each, but a little bit was, you know, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and that's sort of I had to go that route.
Interesting.
Well, I think ideas, because it's always, as you said, there's like few people have ideas. Some of them talk about it, some of them express. Only a few really change to an actionable event.
Yeah.
So, coming back to the ideas, is there a way? Do you follow like a routine? I mean, do you like sit and meditate to get an idea, or what's your? Do you look for it in a specific idea, or do you like think it just comes in particular day? Do you have a routine?
I don't know that I have a routine. I think I have a like a black book that anytime I think of an idea, I'll sort of write it down, and then I'll kind of make a little drawing. I like to draw a lot. Even as a child, I was always kind of doodling a lot. And so I have a black book. It's like a graph paper, and I sort of just keep filling it up whenever I have ideas. The interesting thing is, I think early in my career, I probably had more. This is very interesting, actually. So I think when I was training, I had more outside the box ideas.
Mm.
I think the longer I've been doing it, maybe just the bias of doing it the same way over and over again, actually, I think has a little bit dulled my creativity. So I think to your point, maybe I should have a routine. Maybe I should meditate or, go to the desert or something.
I was just asking you.
But I think that's not a bad idea. But I have noticed that actually over times that like in the beginning, I had some real, because I was looking at it with fresh eyes, and now my eyes are not that fresh. I'm almost 50, So I think, right. So mostly it's just writing it down. I think
Probably
we
let
have
it
so many
flow.
ideas that you have and then they go away. And so I try to like have them written down so I can revisit them. And it's very
So
interesting
it's
to
like
go
a
back.
it's like a black book, and then you go
Yes.
back, and then kind of think, oh, I thought about this 10 years ago, and now
Yeah.
it's come up. How do you find, like, I mean, do you meet people outside your work line of work, especially being a busy surgeon yourself? I mean, because especially being an entrepreneur, you need to kind of like connect with people. I mean, is there a method to it, or is just that you randomly connect? Because in India, because if you're a surgeon, you're kind of occupied from morning to evening,
Yep.
and in fact, you have a clinic after that, so it's almost like late night. But you hardly kind of meet people outside your industry. So how important is it to think, and also how do you find time or
Yeah.
make a routine to connect people
Yeah. I think
outside?
for that routine is super, super important. So I think as surgeons, you're so used to being in control that I think for me, it's been a really humbling experience to oftentimes not be the smartest person in a room. So once a week, we have a lab meeting, and I help to, uh, I'm part of a group that does basic science research at UC San Diego. And so every Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., we have a meeting. And a lot of times they're discussing articles on genes or mRNA, whole cell, biology. And I have to sometimes Google on my other screen as the meeting's going on, because I try to keep up with these people that do it all the time. So I'm always learning, otherwise you get into the situation where you do things exactly how you were taught to do them 20 years ago, but your mentors have been changing because they're innovating, but sometimes surgeons will just stay the same. So I think that meeting's been very useful for me. Sometimes when we have design meetings and you're listening to engineers and you kind of listen to how they think in a very structured way, you talk to marketing people. I think it's very important as a surgeon sometimes to have structured time with people and then to listen, because a lot of times you're like, no, this is how it has to be, but this is what they do for a living. While you're operating, they're marketing. While you're seeing patients, they're
Yeah.
engineers, right? So sometimes you're just like, okay, you just listen to them for a little bit longer,
So-
and so I think for me, I intentionally put myself in situations that I'm not the expert, and I think it kind of helps me to
Get around
be
and
better
meet
around it,
new people.
Do you think that the research that we do in med school? I think in US the research is pretty massive. Everyone has to publish before entering into at least a crazy residency like orthopedics. And India, it's slowly picking up. Most universities require you to have publications at least by the end of residency. But do you think the traditional research, kind of takes away from entrepreneurship, or do you think research and entrepreneurship are both connected?
I think they can be connected. I think it is interesting, as someone who's in the kind of research world a little bit too. I think probably the original intent was to have surgeons that can read the literature critically, right? If you produce a little bit of literature with the help of a mentor, then you have to read critically, you have to research critically. And then when you see a paper 10 years from now, you can say, oh, I think this has commercial bias, or, the statistics are maybe not accurate, or oh, this is not the same patient sample as I have in my practice. You can kind of read them critically instead of just taking everything at face value. I think that's the original intent of research. It has gotten a little bit into like differentiating applicants. You have 10 papers, you have 5 papers, so you must be better, even though maybe your hands are not as good as it, so sometimes it's just another way to grade applicants, which I think maybe is not the best intent. But in terms of like innovation and lab work, I think they a little bit go hand in hand. Like I think especially some of the engineering and testing stuff is based on biomechanics, and some of that has its roots in literature or in research. So I do think it's important to at least have a critical mind to understand statistics, understand materials, biomaterials. I think it helps, but it's not one-to-one. For example, you might be doing research on rotator cuff outcomes. I don't know if that helps you to design a new plate, but I think there is some statistical knowledge and I think reading that's important, but I don't know if it's one-to-one.
Sometimes I feel we got too close to the trees that we forgot the whole forest. Yeah, I think the publications are meant to go hand in hand with the entrepreneurship, but since people are placing too much emphasis on publications alone, then we tend to do publications that are not totally relevant, but they get published anyway because a number of journals are going up every year and
Yes.
publishers want some papers.
Right. Everyone wants to publish every paper, right? When I don't think that everything should be published.
When we take a step back and see, maybe the clinical outcomes will give us questions to solve, and we go to the basic research to develop answers to the questions that we got out of the lack in clinical outcomes. Maybe it can go hand in hand, but the culture is totally changing.
Yes.
Leaving that apart, I need to go a step back in your journey and see what influence Dr. JP Warner had in you. He is one of the legendary entrepreneurs come orthopedic surgeons.
Yeah, totally. JP, I mean, he said it's interesting what I've learned from JP over the years. Initially it was probably more, how do you assess things? What do you look at during surgery? How do you, keep records and stuff like that? But he was just starting to get even more deep into his journey as an entrepreneur. When I was there, he just started VuMedi. He was the first surgeon in VuMedi, believe it or not. I think he was also designing some of the planning tools that they end up selling to Tournier and Stryker. So when I was there, he was also doing all this stuff in the background. I think on Fridays he would have meetings with all the companies while we were, seeing patients and stuff like that. And then it just sort of, his career took off from there. When I started thinking about it, it was just natural to ask him. And so he, over the years, has been very open and a mentor to me, and I can always call him and ask him things. So it just ended up that way. I think I decided to go down this path independent of him doing it. Like I didn't see him as an entrepreneur, but he took off. I was on the West Coast, and then I was like, oh, he's in my circle, he's in my orbit, and he's been very generous about that. And some of his former fellows have done cool things, and he's, I think, been part of the journey for a lot of them. So I think it's kind of a cool bilateral relationship that he advises us and sort of maybe gets some joy from helping us along, and also, we also get a lot out of it. So it's been a really cool relationship. So, and it's interesting how you learn. Sometimes you learn one thing from one person and then they're gone. But for him and I think, yeah, I've learned different things over the decades, really. So it's been pretty cool.
Excellent. So I think coming back to the lab as such, because in India, you got these academic institutions, which receives funding, but then, they actually publish quite a lot of papers and then also patents as well, but it doesn't actually become a translational research where it is a clinical application. So what's your opinion on like, university labs? And also a private funded lab. I mean, let's say we're talking about
Yeah.
something which is actually, dedicated to actually, bring, real world applications to it. So do you think we should be having a differentiation, or what's the setup in the US? Is there a differentiation like that?
Totally. Yeah. And I think the interesting in the US, each university is very unique. There's some of them where they're like where I work, where they put a lot of restrictions on what you can do. There's other ones that encourage it, and so it goes. It's very different from place to place. So there's some that say, "Gosh, whatever you do, Dr. Giri, you work at this place, you keep 100% of what you do in terms of intellectual work." And there might be another place, like I think Mayo Clinic and Cleveland are like that, Cleveland Clinic, which are very huge institutions, world-renowned places that say, you know what, you go and work with the companies, that's fine. You can come up with whatever you want. We'll take a small percentage of it. So that way you're gaining from it, but you're also improving the reputation of the institution as a creative person and as someone who's, dictating new tools and techniques that come out. So I think it varies from place to place. So even some of the surgeons that have invested in our small startup, they are very restricted from actually doing intellectual work with us, and other ones don't have those challenges. So long story short, I think it depends on the institution. Stanford, for example, they have a biodesign group on campus that helps to develop and monetize ideas that their faculty have. So believe it or not, they have engineers in-house, they have patent people in-house, and they actually make money on the work that's produced by their faculty, whether it's computer science, orthopedics, whatever. Their cardiology department is very famous for this. And then there's other places that actually lose money. They have a little firm inside, but they don't do a great job either of vetting the ideas or of marketing them, and they actually lose money year on year. And so it really depends on the institution, is what I'm saying, I guess. And I think private industry, obviously, if it's well funded and they're experienced, they can work much faster and much more efficiently. And so there's definitely a plus to that. The negative, I would say, and I have worked in both places, that sometimes when you work in a university, they'll do work and research without an obvious financial or product endpoint, right? They'll say, hey, you know what? Let's just do gene research, and gosh, maybe CRISPR will come out of it 10 years later without a certain intent of that, right? But when you work at a company, like you work at Amgen or Genentech or Arthrex or J&J, they really want there to be a strong sellable endpoint, usually, I might be generalizing. So I think the nature of the work is different. The pace is faster probably, but the nature of the work is different. So I think there's a very long-winded answer, but I do think it depends on the institution. And if you want to go fast, probably industry's better. But if you have an idea that doesn't have a clear product or financial endpoint, it's probably better than versus
Probably if you want the next graphene, probably you'll have to invest in
yes.
very, very, very basic. But if you want to kind of come up with the next anchor, probably it's a product based.
So it's probably project based.